Hello, hello! Trying something new this time. I worry a lot about making mega projects with elaborate editing and animation, so this time I thought I'd just try writing a script and just showing some not-so-edited footage alongside it. I also just woke up, literally, like a minute ago, so you're going to get the joyful experience of hearing my voice change over time. Nice, huh? So, let me know if this sucks or if it rules. So, I've been playing Baldur's Gate 3 Early Access. I'm going to eventually use it as a talking point for something else. First off, the game is in Early Access. It'll supposedly really come out in a year. Point being, it's rife with bugs and weird design issues, and I fully expect it to change a lot in the future. This video isn't really a criticism of the quality of the game, considering that it's technically not even a game yet. Oh, I'm feeling it now. It is 4 AM. What I actually wanted to write this script about is a stupidly specific topic. Dialogue roles, and dialogue in general, I guess. This is going to be rambly, so that topic will shift around a bit. Very exciting. This is why my channel grew so quickly. Alright, so in a video game, whenever you're talking to some guy or girl or squid man or whatever, you'll be chatting them up and then you'll get a decision. In some games, notably older RPGs, you might get a long list of options. It was longer because it was text only. You could include a mountain of options when all the dialogue was in your head, and the characters all use basic animations, if any at all. In other games, especially a bevy of ones from the aughts and the tens, there was a lot of binary good-evil options. People would play through the game twice, to see all the scenes for being good, and then all the scenes for being bad. If you're playing a bad man, you choose bad man option, like kicking a puppy or stealing from a grandma. You know, because that's just what evil is if you're like 3 years old. If you're a good man, good man do good for big blue points, but bad man red. Wow. Sorry, if you can't tell, I don't have a high opinion of those. So also lumped in with those are games like Mass Effect that tried to do the same thing, but they relabeled good and bad as something else to make the decision seem less stupid than it actually was. By calling good Paragon and evil Renegade, there's just enough wiggle room for the player to not choose Team Red or Team Blue the whole game. In theory, you could choose blue and then a few minutes later choose red. Whether the writing actually reflected what you perceived the decision to be is another matter. I'm really glad that we seem to be mostly past that era of choose your alignment design in gaming. It was the difference between Knights of the Old Republic 1 and Knights of the Old Republic 2. And 1 being a Sith is tantamount to being an insipid street thug that shakes down old ladies for quarters and eats babies because you think it makes you cool. And 2, you're actually just trying to accrue power and manipulate the world around you for your benefit. But even then, in a game that's supposedly about grays, there wasn't that much in between being one stereotype or another stereotype. But that's more of a Star Wars problem with its narratives. Anyway. Wow, is that a rabbit over there? Let's chase that for a second. Okay, so part of why video games are called role-playing games is because they stem from tabletop games. In those games, there's no real board to speak of, and there's no video. It's just you and your imagination. There are pre-made rule sets to try to cover as many scenarios as possible and to create a pre-made world for characters to inhabit. Warhammer is one of them, Dungeons and Dragons is one of them, Shadowrun, Butthole Adventures, not really. Also, a sort of GURPS. I just like saying GURPS. GURPS, it's very fun. And these players are playing a role. They are acting in a similar way a movie or a theater actor might act. They're playing the part of the character they created. So, if they make a big dumb ogre, when put in a situation where they have to solve some basic math, the human playing the game would be able to solve the math problem. The character would not. And so, rule sets like Dungeons & Dragons consider this and give your character an intelligence stat. Your DM, your dungeon master, considers the difficulty of the math problem for your ogre and tells you to roll a die to determine if your ogre is smart enough to figure out the problem. Your intelligence is factored in and you get a result. The randomness of rolling a die assists with the ambiguous nature of translating abstract notions into a game. The human player then continues playing their role as the ogre, either succeeding or failing. The die decisions aren't there to make you succeed or fail so much as to create the conditions for the player to adapt the story as they roleplay it. Role-playing game, that's where the term comes from. Not because Master Chief or Cloud Strife are roles, that's fucking stupid. This idea of taking concepts like intelligence, wisdom, strength, and dexterity and so on, and giving them obvious numerical factors in an effort to help you translate imagination into a discernible, quantifiable game is why when video games started doing it, they were also referred to as role-playing games. That's why. They're called role-playing games even though you aren't playing a role, you're just watching a pre-written character. That's also why insufferable twats just jam numbers on the guns and then say their game has RPG elements. It's a term that's lost all meaning. In tabletop, the randomness of the result is essential. This is because the situations are all imaginary. More importantly, they are dynamic and specific to the people playing the game. You can imagine yourself in a situation where your character wants to German suplex a dragon out of midair, because your character is thematically imagined to be similar to a luchador, and he's a badass. And a video game, you can't do that, unless it's a very specific, animated, scripted, and voiced situation the designers intended for you to be in. In tabletop, you can. In tabletop, you can do anything. As long as you can roll a natural 20, any crazy-ass thing you can imagine that the DM agrees is technically possible is something you can do. Imagination requires randomization. Otherwise, every situation would be solved. You can never suplex that dragon because the numbers would say you can't. But if you roll a die that allows you to both critically succeed and critically fail, you create a game that is also fair for the role you are playing. In a video game, randomizing roles is almost meaningless. No, I said almost. In a video game, the content is limited. It isn't your imagination. It's assets that have to be created. In tabletop, your options are limitless. In programming, you may only have one option, or a blue and red option, or even 10 options, but they are still defined. Since all values in programming are known, there's no reason to worry about randomizing for a result. There's no imagination to factor in. You can't suplex the dragon. Even if you can, there's a defined parameter that requires very specific values to activate. Here's where the almost comes into play. There is a slight value in randomizing results. That value comes from forcing the player out of their comfort zone. Similar to creating the conditions for adaptive storytelling in tabletop, in a video game you use randomness to create the conditions for adaptive gameplay. Many players, if you give them an option between 20 guns throughout the game, they'll just use the first one they picked up and nothing else. People are stupid and lazy like that. That's why Breath of the Wild has insufferable durability system that definitely sucked ass. A lot of people defend it because they think the idea is okay, so they end up unwittingly endorsing a clearly broken system because they can't mentally divide concept from design. But you know, it was intended to force you into trying a wide variety of options, which it sort of does. And apparently also to make you use the Master Sword exclusively for cutting down trees, and use bombs to kill most enemies because you don't want to have to worry about accessing the fucking menus constantly to exchange out weapons. Anyways, in gameplay, things like randomizing bullet spread or randomizing chances to succeed a shot are there to force you to be adaptive, to dynamically change your approach in some way. In dialogue, players typically will choose the best option. Even in Baldur's Gate 3, the developers have looked at their data and said that this is exactly what players are doing, because there's usually an obviously best option. If given a list of one incredibly hostile option, one stupid option, one neutral option, and one option that gets on the NPC's good side, players will probably choose the quote-unquote good one. Randomizing results ensures that even if the player chooses this good option, it may still piss off the NPC, or not convince them, or make your dick fall out of your pants or something. If you're a designer that made 5 scenes for one encounter, you don't want 90% of all players seeing the exact same sequence. I'll come back to that notion, but just remember, this type of approach hinges on all of the outcomes being desirable in some way. Baldur's Gate 3 has a lot of rolls. Baldur's Gate 3 does for dice rolls what E621 does for Animal Crossing. It does a great deal, and most of it's bad. You see, Baldur's Gate 3 uses Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition as its entire base, so if D&D handles a situation with a D20 or D6, you better believe Baldur's Gate is going to slavishly do the exact same thing. When you walk past a trap, you roll to see whether your character can see it or not. When you try to shoot a guy with a bow, which you'll be doing a lot of, you roll to see whether it hit or not. When you see a magic chest, you roll to see whether you know it's magic. You roll to disarm the trap on the chest. You roll to lockpick the chest. When you talk to someone, you roll to see whether your character remembers a historical fact. You roll to see whether your character can convince an NPC of something, and so on. So many of them. There is a fuck ton of rolling dice in this video game with completely solved parameters. This is not tabletop, this is not imagination. Such excessive rolling is not needed in a video game with so few choices and such a small amount of wiggle room for interpretation. In a video game, a check on historical knowledge is solved. On tabletop, perhaps the knowledge being discussed isn't even in the setting. It could be homebrewed, you don't know. As such, there's a small amount of randomness required to solve any situation. In the video game, the knowledge is defined, it's solved, and immutable. As such, you can freely define what the requirement to know the information happens to be. Perhaps knowing Santa Claus isn't real requires a wisdom of 5. Perhaps knowing Santa Claus is actually real, and is a weave-born demon that haunts the concept of the holidays or something, requires a wisdom of 15. If you meet these requirements, as long as the programmer placed them into the game, these are things you should know if you meet the requirement. It isn't random. Yet in Baldur's Gate, you can actually relive the same sequence over and over again and get a different result on whether your character knows something or not. Having randomization in something like a visual check makes a little more sense. If there's a secret button on the wall, the player might know about it from another playthrough. Having this be controlled by character limits is a good thing. Randomness in this situation is also a little more warranted. Even in real life, let's say you can't find your phone. As is often the case, you are disheveled, sweating, fat, and lumbering to and fro from the dark corners of your room, probing the perimeter of your nesting ground like a mole rat looking for tube roots. As you frantically claw apart your furniture and stuff dusty Cheeto fragments into your drooling maw, you're not guaranteed to find that phone. Your intelligence didn't get any higher, it certainly can't go any lower. Your eyes just didn't glance the right spot at the right time. There's a certain amount of what we perceive as randomness in a visual check, capability aside. So, point being, randomness in a video game is okay so long as you design for it. Some situations may call for it, some may not. You cannot and should not blanket apply an entire rule set to every single situation in a video game. This is the issue with Baldur's Gate. There is too much goddamn rolling. Remember the thing that I told you to remember from earlier? How I said that designers can utilize randomness to ensure that players can't stay in their comfort zone and have to try new situations. Also recall, before that, I said that rolling a die and randomizing the result in tabletop is less about succeeding and failing and more about generating a scenario for the player to roleplay their character through it. In other words, randomizing results in real D&D is about improvisation, and in video game D&D, it's about showcasing content. So then, for both tabletop and video games, there's commonly known ways for the player involved to ruin the game. In tabletop, you can get that guy. That guy is a player that is, quite frankly, a stupid little shithead. It can be the girlfriend that doesn't want to be there, or the sweaty Dorito junkie that tries to metagame every decision, or even the player that doesn't show up for sessions for 2 months and then demands that you reinsert them into the narrative. It could even be the DM. DMs can be stupid little dick nuggets too. Maybe the DM doesn't like one of the players and has rocks fall on his head. Maybe he tosses him down a pit because he couldn't roll a 19. Whatever. Or maybe the DM has a very specific story he wants to tell, and when the players start accidentally crafting their own experience, he sends a divine being to come down from heaven to reset the situation and force everyone back into the acting positions that the DM actually wants. Undermining the whole point of playing a tabletop game. That guy. For tabletop dice rolls, which are about generating improvisation, no matter who that guy is, you can ruin the improvisation by just refusing to cooperate. If you're an actor who's intent on ruining the scene, it's going to be ruined, because you have a tiny penis and the world simply must know. For video game dice rolls, which are about showcasing, that guy can only be one person. The writer, or the director, whoever the asshole is who's actually in control of the scene, effectively the video game DM. This is because, like I said, randomizing results in video games has almost no value. It only has one value, showcasing content. If your game has no content worth showcasing, whether for narrative or gameplay, it doesn't need randomization. For this shitty early morning topic of dice rolls and video game dialogue, which now feels as robust and complete as a Christmas sweater, I will now iterate on Baldur's Gate. Too much of this fucking game is about failing. If there's an area with 5 landmines in it, in between your character pathfinding over them and just rolling to see the fucking things, it'll probably take 20 minutes of reloads to get all of them. If you pass by a statue and you're just curious what it is, it'll probably take about 5 minutes of reloads to get your character to stop being like, pretty statue, and to suddenly remember that he's a fucking scholar that has seen 1 or 2 books in his life. In combat, you're going to be missing a lot, especially if you're a wizard for some reason. This is XCOM without the lessons XCOM learned by being XCOM. Rolls in XCOM need to be over 90% or above, or the game is basically unplayable. If a roll in XCOM is not 100%, you should expect it to miss. Half cover is no cover. I have missed 100% success rolls in XCOM, somehow. I am an XCOM veteran. I hate XCOM, and that is why I love XCOM. Point being, a lesson learned very early in developing these games is that missing 20% of your shots or something similar, to the player, feels a lot like missing 80% of your shots. It feels terrible, even if you logically know it to not be the case. Baldur's Gate has not learned this lesson. Baldur's Gate combat is just as good as its dialogue rolls, and its dialogue rolls wildly suck ass. Experiencing a good dialogue in a video game should feel like being a teenager, and being allowed to grope a boob for the first time. It's not really a big deal, and you'll certainly be admonished for recounting it 10 years later, but that moment of exploration served as a road bump that slowed your path, however briefly, to inexorably becoming a high school custodian.
Keep out of it.
Baldur's Gate 3's dialogue options have the breast feel of a Ziploc bag filled with warm dog urine. Which is to say, there's a lot of it. A surprising amount, in fact. But it isn't a boob. And why? You see, most of the time, the dialogue doesn't matter. The outcome will be more or less the same no matter what you do. But there's usually one option with a roll in it that results in you getting a blowjob from a small, dirty, aged goblin. And all your party members, besides Batnose, think you're cool because of it. That's the good option. The rest are bad or are simply a pathway to escaping the conversation without taking damage, or more often being forced into a fight.
It's none of your concern.
There's a minor variety in exploring these pathways to nowhere, but they all lead to the same place. 2 voice lines and a fat load of nothing. The good option always has 2 or 3 roadblocks in the way. Fail any of them and you're treated like an idiot for trying to roll the die at all and are kicked out of the conversation. Encounters with these conversations also tend to happen with no warning. You're heavily injured after a fight, and walk onto the wrong patch of ground. An NPC appears out of nowhere. You are given a role you cannot possibly succeed, and you are punished for not succeeding it by being thrust into a fight against 1 billion lions, all of which are perched upon machine gun emplacements while you try to pull up your beltless pantaloons, your pencil-thin penis flapping in the autumn breeze. Conversations in this game have the same amount of depth as its character creator. Sure, it looks like a lot, but it's actually just a small collection of really bad character creators because too much focus is being placed on novelty instead of depth. Once you select the various races, you'll find they have about half a dozen heads to choose from with no way to alter their features, and that's about it. Just skin tones and eye color. A lot of hair, though. Unless you have horns, for some reason. Also, if you're balding, you get, like, 2 options. They didn't have my Captain Picard-esque hair, so I had to choose no hair. The facial hair also sucks because so much emphasis is placed on either gigantic beards or fanciful beards, but that's every game that bothers to have them. When it asked me to create what I desire, I discovered that I couldn't because I hated all the faces. I didn't want any of them. Did like the idea of having a devil girl, though. The tieflings really liked that. Was really into that. But they aren't allowed to have bangs for some reason. I guess because of clipping? Because of the horns? Even though some of the hair on normal ones clips into the faces anyway. Not a fan of the character creator. I'm really not. Really rudimentary, focuses way too much on novelty, just like the rest of the game. That's that's my point. Anyway, back to conversations. Let's say that you have an intelligence stat of 16. Pretty good. Pretty good. You know the Latin family name for penguins or something. Sometimes, you know, depending on rolls. It's Finessidae, by the way. The smartest someone can be without magic is a 20, so the game has you roll a d20. The game also tells you that you get a +3 bonus from your intelligence stat of 16. Somehow. Without knowing anything about D&D, you might think then that you'd need a roll of 2 or above if your stat was a 15. This is not how D&D works, of course, but if you don't know, you don't know. But no, your target roll is a 10. Factoring in your knowledge of penguins, your target roll is now a 7. That's right, your eclectic knowledge of land birds has improved your odds by 15%. If you were the smartest person in the world, your odds of succeeding the roll may have improved by 20%. Who can say? You failed the roll, of course, because this is Baldur's Gate 3. Baldur's Gate 3 is a fucking hard-ass that doesn't care if you're role-playing as Jackie Chan. You will drop that baby, and you will hit yourself in the face with the ladder. You will get trouble. Even if the odds to succeed are 50%, you'll probably fail 70% of the time. And it will feel like 90% of the time. You reload your save and try again. 15 times. Somehow you always roll below a 7. Somehow your main stat of intelligence does not fucking matter, even though the roll is for the stat of intelligence. Defeated, you choose to stop bothering with these reloads and choose the generic option. Oh, the MP says as a result. Okay. End scene. That is the breast feel of Baldur's Gate 3. Randomization in dialogue is only as good as the paths it sets you on. If there's only one path worth choosing, then remove the dice roll and have it be a raw check. If there are several outcomes for a sequence, but 9 out of 10 result in your characters dying or being humiliated or shamed in some way, there's really only one. The worth of randomization in video game dialogue hinges completely on the quality of the writing. I can think of very, very few games in which this actually works. It almost never works. Disco Elysium is the only one that immediately comes to mind. And Disco Elysium works because its writing is superb. Even if your character fails and slips back into bad habits, the character writing of those sequences is so powerful that it might be said that failing your checks is worth more than succeeding them. Again, this hinges totally on the quality of your writing, and the consequences of the rolls. Baldur's Gate 3's... This is a weird sequence. Baldur's Gate 3's... What a weird... Baldur's Gate 3's dialogue is not Disco Elysium quality. It never will be. The differences between dialogue options are usually a single voice line. More importantly, the designers treat options as being inherently superior but more difficult. Consequences in Baldur's Gate are either beneficial to everyone or result in clusterfuck bloodbaths. So, either don't try and sort of succeed, or try little and probably fail. It feels just like a Ziploc bag, filled with dog urine. Warm dog urine, with a 5% additional chance to stay closed, because you're such a smart guy. Consider tabletop for a moment. You know that little board that dungeon masters are sometimes shown to have in front of them? That little thing? It hides what they're up to, those sneaky little freaks. But the reason why they hide what they're doing is so that it can benefit the players at the table. It keeps players from being spoiled on plot details, mainly. But it also allows the DM to lie about their own dice rolls. If your DM is that guy, then sure, this is a bad thing. But most of the time, it's because of something almost all role-playing players know. Good DMs don't always follow their rules. If you're a good DM, you don't want your players to die unless they really deserve it. Even if they die, you'll work your ass off on a way to bring them back. This is for their benefit, it is for the sake of the game. When the players are telling their own stories, you'll go out of your way to give them what they need to accomplish their goals. You're not going to give them the game, but you give them everything that they need to succeed. And a good DM, if a throw is off by 1 point from succeeding, they'll lie and say that you beat the odds. One of the ways that XCOM fixed its shit was by introducing a secret mechanic. The more you miss your shots, the more the game will lie about the shot odds. Even if you have a listed 10% chance to hit, it'll just give you a successful roll. It will give you 100%. It also works in reverse. If you land too many bad shots randomly, the game will make you miss once. No matter your opinion on what a cheating little slut XCOM can be, and make no mistake, XCOM is a slut. Please appreciate what they are trying to do. Missing 20% of your shots by the rules still feels terrible. And so, a good DM, a good video game designer, leverages this by lying about the odds in your favor, and placing the difficulty somewhere else other than the element the player will be most engaged with. Baldur's Gate 3, in its current form, is a Dungeons & Dragons campaign being run by a terrible dungeon master. The DM responsible for Baldur's Gate 3 is a rule-thumping asshole with a single story to tell. You cannot slavishly translate a tabletop's exact rule set into a video game, especially not when even in the tabletop, the people playing and running the game will totally ignore the rules to make them work, because that's what tabletop games are. D&D as a system is famous for releasing edition after edition that have major glaring holes in its internal logic that require the players to either fix them themselves or ignore them. Even Baldur's Gate 3 had to fix rangers because they fucking suck otherwise. So, point made. Video games don't put randomized stat-driven rolls into your dialogue systems, or almost anything. They don't belong in video games unless they're controlling something very dynamic, very back-end. Or unless you are an amazing writer or designer that knows exactly how to explore failure in the most fascinating way possible. Play Disco Elysium. It has the breast feel of breasts. Again, Baldur's Gate 3 just released in early access. I can't possibly imagine, after Original Sin, that these kinds of problems will stick around for too long. But it does make them an easy whipping boy to show off such a basic design flaw. I didn't even mention how badly the game implements the concept of short rests and long rests. In the tabletop, you can go a whole session without fighting a single enemy. One fight can sometimes take hours, but once it's over, it's a gigantic victory. Gaining a single level can turn you into a cataclysm made flesh. And DMs set the rules for why you can't rest, depending on your circumstances and whether the DM thinks it should be discouraged. In Baldur's Gate 3, it suggested you'll fucking explode if you rest more than 2 or 3 days, in the story. I got to the end of early access having only rested 3 times. Ever. In the entirety of the game, up until the very end of that first act, I rested only 3 times, because I just didn't know how much they wanted me to rest. It was hell. I was level 4, because that's the highest level you can be in early access, despite having probably been in 100 fights against over 5 trillion goblins. The 4 levels in Baldur's Gate 3 are almost meaningless. I eventually learned that healing is pointless because you'll probably die in one hit no matter what, because enemies are all on cocaine. And always have the high ground, of course. An advantage. Attacking is also meaningless, because you will miss. And by you will miss, I mean you will probably hit 70% of the time, maybe. Probably not even that, probably 50% of the time. But it will feel like you always miss. Using cantrips was king for a while, until I realized that these also always miss. But they are free. Attacking will always miss. Throwing items will always miss. You know how you actually win encounters in Baldur's Gate 3? Attack with bows, which also always miss, and then immediately scurry like rats and crouch behind a wall. The enemies are pretty stupid and will do one of 2 things. They may shut off their AI entirely and just stand there as you pelt them with arrows and then crouch after every turn to keep their AI shut off. Or they will blatantly cheat, just like XCOM enemies, and run right up to your character, look them straight in the eye because they just so happen to be there. And you will succeed a stealth check. They won't actually see you, even though they're looking directly at you. Then you will keep re-rolling the same stealth check repeatedly until the AI succeeds in making you come out of stealth so it can attack you, as it looks directly at you. Again, because it just so happened to be looking at that one patch of ground. Pretty lucky, huh? At that point, because enemies love to attack downed enemies, you can use your corpse as a tank and just keep picking it back up with a stealth buddy as your other 2 guys weed away the mountain of enemies with 2 damage attacks. Or 0 damage attacks, as the case may be. The combat sucks right now, and it's not fun, is what I'm getting at. If you create your character correctly, then at least the first portion of the game will be alarmingly easy. Up until that fucking windmill. You know the one. After the third time resting in front of the ending trigger for the first act, a cutscene appeared and made it clear that the entire premise of not resting unless you had to was, you guessed it, also meaningless. And so afterwards I learned that I should camp and rest after every single encounter. Not to try my best to avoid doing it at all, no. You need to do it all the time, for any reason at all. Even if you get a splinter in your little thumb, you should camp and waste a day to heal that one health point. Because the resting system in Dungeons & Dragons is fucking stupid, and always has been. It's never been done correctly, and likely never will be, because it hinges on a dungeon master telling you to stop fucking using it. In a video game, there is no dungeon master, beyond programming itself. It's just a stupid system that has no breaks. It relies totally on you not wanting to see a load screen, and instead deciding to just tough it out so that you can get out of this damn temple already. The two lessons I'd like to communicate in this rambling video are 1. Characters should feel good about their choices, and their choices should be equally valid. If they aren't, cut that shit out. And 2, you can't just wheelbarrow in a system from another game, especially not from another industry of games, and then expect any of it to work, because designing a fucking game means you have to be a designer, a DM, and adjust the rules for the campaign you're trying to run. Design is dynamic. So, in other words, Larian Studios, please pull your dicks out of 5th edition's asshole and do your jobs as video game designers, and design a video game for video game players, not for tabletop. Did you know Magic Missile in this video game can miss? Magic Missile. It collides with surfaces depending on the arc of the projectile. Magic Missile. The spell that can't miss, like the infamous D&D spell that cannot possibly miss, because it's a magic missile that just finds its way to the target. They somehow found a way to turn a distance-based spell that always hits, if you're in range, into a spell that can actually miss. What an asshole! But considering their background, I kind of imagine that they'll sort this stuff out. Unless they can't change anything dramatically from D&D's rules because of the license or something. In which case, whoever is fucking with her ability to actually design a working system, please shut the fuck up and let them do their jobs. But again, early access. Maybe then none of this applies at all. But it still feels good to complain about. Complaining is fun. Sorry for recording so early in the morning, but I really wanted to get this done. It's been lingering a little bit too much. I had to re-record because all day yesterday I was actually recording this same thing, and my voice kept going out, and I realized it's just not the day. I just can't do it now. So I wanted to rush this out as fast as possible. And for some reason, recording in the morning means that my voice is a little bit more stable, even though I make a lot more mouth noises. I've noticed as I've gotten older, my body just, no matter what I do, wants to make weird mouth noises, like I'm a fucking old man with his dentures in. I fucking hate it. Anyways, let me know what your opinion is of these only slightly edited videos. They're hopefully, I haven't edited anything yet. Hopefully they're a little bit easier to put together in editing, which is my most hated part of this. But they take just as much time to write, apparently, as I learned. But it is a little bit faster, so let me know. Have a good day.